Hello, good afternoon. I'm Nir. I'm the founder of Palo Alto Networks. I started this mess about 14 years ago, just under 14 years ago. We've been selling products for 12 years. And started as a network security vendor, and then we ventured into other areas as well, and we can talk about why and how. Overall, today, Palo Alto Networks is the largest cybersecurity vendor in the world. We're the largest in terms of value, the largest in terms of total sales, largest in terms of revenues, and other metrics as well. In network security, which is where we started, we're probably about 50% bigger than the next player in the market. Okay, depending how you look at their accounting tricks. So these are the 30 seconds of marketing fluff. Now let's talk about the real stuff. Why did I start Palo Alto Networks? Why did the world need yet another cybersecurity company? The reason it wasn't just myself, started Palo Alto Networks is to try to unscrew the cybersecurity industry. And what I mean by unscrew is, if you look at the evolution of the cybersecurity industry, you'll see that for every problem, there is a set of companies that solve that problem. And then those companies become relatively big and ignore the rest of the challenges that customers have with cybersecurity. And then you have customers, asking for more stuff, and a new set of companies get funded and build the next thing to solve the next cybersecurity challenge, and so on. And we end up in a situation today where many of our customers have dozens of vendors, dozens of cybersecurity vendors in their infrastructure. So we started Palo Alto Networks to fix that. And we started with network security. So what we've done with network security is we transformed the market from a market where you used to buy many different products and either deploy them throughout your infrastructure. Most cases it was too expensive. So you would deploy them in very small number of locations and backhaul all your traffic into these locations, and transformed it for our customers into, you buy one product, we call it a next generation firewall. And then everything else that you need, again, initially network security, is delivered as a subscription service on top of it. And that subscription service, in most cases, is delivered as a SaaS service from the cloud. And that was the big change that we've created. There were attempts before us to take multiple security products and put them on one box and sell them as one box. And of course, that doesn't work. What we've done is we put one product called Next Generation Firewall with one engine on it. Well, in reality, a couple of engines that are able to do all kind of different things. And the actual work, the actual brain is in the cloud, in our data centers, delivered as a SaaS service. So our customers don't deploy a sandbox. Our customers use a sandbox that we provide from the cloud. And we have literally thousands and probably tens of thousands of servers running the sandbox for all our customers, or at least half our customers are using that. When we started delivering that service, maybe 7 years ago, everybody were laughing at us. They would say customers would never send files to the cloud. Customers will never take, not just their executables that run in their network, but all PDF documents and Word documents, Excel documents, and so on, and they'll never upload it into your service in the cloud. You need to build an on-premise sandbox. And our argument was on-premise sandboxes don't work. You need to update the sandbox at least once a week, usually once a day, because of things that the adversary is doing. Nobody's going to do software updates on premise every day or every week. They'll do it maybe once every 6 months. Number two, it's very easy to overwhelm a sandbox running on premise. If you know that the capacity is 1,000 files per hour, no problem. I'll just send you 10,000 email attachments, and you'll have to sandbox all of them, and you'll be backlogged for the next 10 hours, allowing me to do whatever I want. When you run it in the cloud, it's much more difficult to do that. We can update the software every day, like the advantage of SaaS services. When we started, there was another company. Do we mention company names, or we don't mention company names? Which was the leader in sandboxes. Since then, they were acquired by Mandiant, and they were the market leader. They had hundreds of customers, maybe thousands of customers. Their market cap was actually higher than ours. And today, they have probably the same number of customers. We have 30,000 customers using our sandbox in the cloud. Okay, hundreds of millions of dollars a year business for us. And those customers send all their files to the cloud for sandboxing. And then when we find something bad, we update not just them, but we update our entire customer base with whatever we find in order to stop the attack across multiple vectors. And sandbox is one example. Another example is behavior analytics. Our customers don't deploy behavior analytics sensors. They upload the data to the cloud. We run behavior analytics in the cloud. Our customers don't deploy proxies. It's a cloud-delivered service. Our customers don't deploy IPSs separately from the firewall. Well, this is a simple service. It's mostly a signature service delivered from the cloud. And there are many examples like that of things that our customers don't do, but rather get delivered as a SaaS service. And we started doing it with network security. And as I said, in network security today, we are by far the largest vendor in the world. And then we went into endpoint security. And not only we have a really, really good endpoint security agent that recently is winning the #1 in all security tests, it's also able to subscribe to at least the relevant SaaS services and deliver the same SaaS services on top of the endpoint. So the same sandbox is running both on the network traffic and on endpoint, files that appear on endpoint that we've never seen before. And then we entered the CASB market through an acquisition, same thing. We connected some of these services, the relevant ones to SaaS. Then we entered the PaaS security and IaaS security market through 2 acquisitions. The CEO of one of these acquisitions will speak later, Varun. Same thing. We're connecting those services to, again, the relevant SaaS services. It's a process that takes time, but it's happening. And we recently announced the acquisition of the world's leading container security company and the world's leading serverless security company, Twistlock and PureSec. And same thing. Once we close these acquisitions, the small one already closed, the larger one hasn't. We're going to start the process of integrating those things with the same SaaS services. So you get the same cybersecurity function as a SaaS delivered service on top of network, endpoint, SaaS applications, PaaS applications, infrastructure as a service, containers, and so on. And that's really our strategy. That's our philosophy. That's where we see the market going. We see a cybersecurity market where almost everything is consumed as a service. And we're not the only ones, right? We're seeing companies like Okta transforming the identity market from an on-premise market to a cloud-delivered market. We have seen that happening with vulnerability scanning, right? From an on-premise scanning to cloud-delivered scanning, and so on. I think it's natural that the industry, like almost any other IT industry, will transform itself to a SaaS-delivered industry. And we're doing it across network, physical, and virtual, endpoint, SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, containers, serverless, whatever the world invents tomorrow, we'll find a way to attach our services to it and deliver SaaS services on top of that. Okay, so that's in whatever, 5 minutes or 7 minutes, what Palo Alto Networks does and what's special about Palo Alto Networks. Questions? Okay, if there are no questions, that's good. I have other things to say. So, like I said, the reason we thought that the world needed yet another cybersecurity vendor, and we were right. I mean, we grew to be the largest vendor in 12 years, competing against companies that have been selling for, 25, 30 years, is because of the way the industry has treated its customers, of requiring customers to use many different on-premise products versus delivering an integrated solution from the cloud. And the industry has worked really, really hard on doing that in enterprise security, meaning securing enterprises, on-premise, network, endpoint, and maybe a few other things. We're seeing the same process now happening with cloud security. So if you're a customer today and you ask yourself, what do I need to protect myself in the cloud? Well, you need a virtual firewall. I know there's an argument about whether you need it or not. I can argue with anyone and show you why you cannot secure public cloud deployments without a real firewall. But let's leave that aside. You need endpoint security, you need container security, you need serverless security, you need PaaS security, you need IaaS security, and there are other things that you need. And the industry, using its legacy approach, is screwing that as well. The industry is now creating a separate silo, a set of companies, usually overfunded and overcrowded silos of delivering each one of these. So you have a set of companies doing PaaS security. We bought the 2 leading ones. You have a set of companies doing container security. Yet another set of companies doing serverless security. Yet another set of companies doing virtual firewalls. I mean, these are the traditional firewall companies. Yet another set of companies doing endpoint security and so on. And we think that there is an opportunity for a vendor like us to, from the get-go, build an integrated solution of best-of-breed capabilities, so customers don't have to repeat the mistakes of the past when it comes to securing their cloud deployments. And when I say cloud, I mean both public and private cloud, and find a way to have a solution that they don't need to spend a lot of time integrating and operationalizing. And which is why we recently made acquisitions of the leading companies in each of these spaces. Not all of them. We think that in virtual firewall, we didn't have to acquire anyone. We are by far the leader in virtual firewalls. We are the #1 vendor on each marketplace of public cloud providers. In endpoint, we didn't have to do that, but in the other areas, we went out and we bought the best of breed, the best companies out there, and we're in the process of integrating together into one suite that customers don't need to integrate themselves. And then the other area that we think the industry is working really hard right now on trying to screw, again, the same way we did with endpoint security, by overfunding overcrowded silos, is the security operations center. So if you look at the Security Operations Center, which is the place where all these other things that we do eventually end up, because that's where alerts and other things end up, it all started with the SIEM, the Security Incident and Event Manager, which doesn't do incident and event management, but that's okay. So it all started with the SIEM, and I think most realize today that SIEMs don't really do much when it comes to security. It's mostly a tool for seeing dashboards and other meaningless reports, as well as being able to go in and query for things if you're in an incident response situation or an investigation situation. And SIEMs do some correlation. You can say if you see this, and this, then generate an alert, because enterprises don't have enough alerts already. We need to generate more alerts. So they have not 100,000 alerts they cannot handle, but 110,000 alerts every day they cannot handle. So that's what SIEMs do. And since everybody realized that SIEM is certainly not enough, probably not doing much, we start seeing different silos being created. So the other thing maybe about SIEMs, before I talk about those silos, is SIEMs really collect logs. They don't collect data. Okay, what I mean by data is all system calls from endpoints. That's data. That's meaningful data. All the system calls, or at least a lot of the important system calls that happen on endpoints. Really deep information from the network. I want to see every time anyone logs into Facebook. I want to know the username, and I want to see who their friends are. Why? Because I want to do machine learning to see if it's a bot or it's a real Facebook user. Okay, so this is something that you really want to collect, but SIEMs don't collect. SIEMs wait for the firewall or the endpoint or an application or a server or whatever you connected your SIEM to be gracious enough to report something. And then SIEMs also have the issue of being too expensive, so customers have to choose what they log and what they don't log, and that's another issue. But because of all these deficiencies, we're start seeing silos, right? So SIEMs don't collect data from endpoints. At best, they collect logs from an antivirus running on the endpoint whenever that antivirus detects something. So we started seeing a set of companies being funded for creating an agent, yet another agent sitting on the endpoint, collecting data from the endpoint into yet another data lake other than the SIEM, process that data using machine learning, rules, humans, whatever, finding attacks, and then responding to these attacks with instructions back to the endpoint as to what to do. We call these vendors EDR vendors, endpoint detection and response. Okay, there's a long list of vendors there. Separately from that, the industry has funded another silo in doing the same thing for network. So a set of vendors that are building network sensors, they expect you to deploy the network sensors, collect deep data from the network, send all that data into yet another data lake, run on that data lake, whatever, machine learning, rules, humans, whatever it is, find attacks, respond back to the network. We don't have a good name for that, but in most cases, we'll call them UEBA vendors, user and entity behavior analytics, even though UEBA can be applied to many other things as well. It's okay. That's not enough. What about cloud? Okay, let's create another silo, create companies collecting data from public clouds and private clouds, process the data using machine learning, rules, humans, whatever, and if you find something bad, respond back to the cloud. That's not enough. What about SaaS applications? Let's find a set of companies doing that for SaaS applications. We'll call them CASB, okay? Cloud Access and Security Broker. They don't do any access brokerage, but that's okay also. So you get a picture, right? Now we're seeing companies being funded around IoT. Companies being funded around collecting data from IoTs, either putting their own sensors or in most cases collecting it from us, using the deep data that we can collect from the traffic, using their algorithms, machine learning, rules, humans, whatever, to find IoT-related attacks, and then they're still not responding back to the IoTs, but maybe one day they'll respond back to the IoTs. So each of these is done in silos. Each of these is going to a different data lake, a different set of data, and that just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, number one, to limit yourself when you look for attacks to data coming from a specific location. It will be very beneficial if when you look for attacks, you would use both endpoint, network, cloud, SaaS, and so on data. And number two, it doesn't make any financial sense, okay? So that's just what our industry, the cybersecurity industry, is really good at. It's at creating a lot of silos, and that's part of what we are fixing as well. Yes?
I had a bit of a question regarding the everything going to the cloud and everything kind of going to your system. So one of the things that I work on at my current role is doing development for analytics for the clients. I don't work in that department directly. I support them in the security side, but they do a lot of that where they build a solution or do the code for the client specifically, but then the client owns that code. They own that development. In your kind of deployment and that, if you kind of everything's going into your system, does that mean they're kind of dependent on your solution? So if they were to move to another client or move to another company, everything would be kind of starting over, wouldn't they?
Yes and no. So there are two aspects to it. The first thing is, which data do you collect? What do you use as sensors for the data? Today, our customers are limited to using our products as sensors, but we're adding more sensors.
Okay.
So potentially competitor products can be added, as well as things that we don't do and they don't do, like applications and servers and so on. There's two schools of thoughts here. The first school of thought is the engineering school of thought, which is we'll only collect data that is useful. So for example, I'm not going to collect data from our firewall competitors, because our firewall competitors at best can collect 5 tuples. Source IP, destination IP, source port, destination port protocol, information that was maybe 15 years ago relevant on the internet when things had IP addresses and port numbers. So the first school of thought is we'll only collect data that is useful for analytics. The second school of thought is let's collect everything, and if customers are willing to pay for that. So I think there's still argument as to which one you should do. And so that's on the data collection side. On the application side of using the data, so we provide applications like detection and response. Today we do it across network and endpoint. We need to do it across other things as well, and sandboxing and other applications. But our system is open to any third party that wants to build their own application, whether it's a competitor, like endpoint competitor that says, hey, I only collect endpoint data. Why don't I use the data that Palo Alto Networks connect? That way I don't collect. That way I don't even have to deal with putting an agent on an endpoint. Palo Alto Networks also collect network and other data as well. So let's take our secret sauce and apply it to everything. And also customers can write their own applications on top of the data.
Okay.
And that's transferable. I mean, we haven't done that yet, but the idea is to create a marketplace and be able to transfer that around. I really think that's the future of the cybersecurity industry, especially when more and more of the cybersecurity detection and response, as well as prevention, is based on data. We have to create one place where the data is and then create an ecosystem on top of it. Kind of what Apple and Google did with the phone.
I guess that in that way, basically, I've asked the same question to all the companies we've chatted with, so I apologise to my colleagues. But because I work in the UK, our head office is in the UK, but we've got offices around the world, including specifically New York. And so the biggest question I always have with vendors is, what do they do about GDPR considerations? And if you're dealing with analytics, you have to deal with the data. So that data, in my scenario, cannot leave the EU.
Yep.
And so a couple of the companies have said basically you'd have to have two solutions, like two different instances. Is that the same with you? You'd have to have two different instances?
Yeah, so we have, today we have data centers that store that data in both the US and the EU, as well as some of the data we store in Japan and in Singapore. And we'll be adding more this year, partly by moving to public cloud providers as well.
Okay.
So we have that. The applications that you write, they run better if they're local and the data is local, but theoretically, you can write your application in such a way that you take intermediate results from different locations and then combine them together in one location.
So basically, you're saying you wouldn't necessarily have two different separate instances, you just have two different data pools. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
But doesn't that then make it a little tougher? If you're having two data pools, how do you correlate the data between the two?
That makes the application a little bit more difficult. Yes. Now, most of the data is so a lot of the data is time series data. So the data is time series. It's a series of events. Or data that you collected. So there are tricks you can do there because you can tell where you are. It's not random data that's in random order.
Yeah, I mean, as a security guy, I keep thinking like you go back to what you were saying before about the SIEM, about SIEMs are expensive and putting more data in there.
Yeah.
From a security standpoint, I'm like, I want all the data. I want all the information, all the logs, because then I can correlate events across the different systems. But then the CFO is saying, "Oh, that bill's kind of high. Hold on."
So forget about the bill. Let's say that we solved it. Okay, we charge today $2,000 a year per terabyte in the cloud, all in, including the service. So that's cheaper than you can do elk yourself. So forget about the bill. You're right.
Well, no.
I think the bigger issue is how do you get all the data.
It's the CFO that's the one that's saying.
No, I'll tell you.
But you're right. As we progress more, and as you look at Azure, you look at Google, the cloud services they have, the price per terabyte is just dropping.
Correct. I think that there is a bigger question that I think you're referring to, or not question, but issue, which is, they're going to be, and you too. I think that there's going to be a clash between cybersecurity and regulation.
There already is.
There already is, and
So actually,
it's going to increase.
But that's my question. So in a highly regulated industry, whatever one it is, or a highly regulated country like Europe, your countries like Europe and Japan and China, actually, for a number of reasons, forensics becomes a real nightmare in the cloud. And if I'm sending you my data, my files, and they reference things that are highly regulated, you can't actually have them anywhere because now they're out of my control. So if they're out of my control, you guys have to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, forensically prove that you haven't modified them.
Yeah.
So I need to know, do you have chain of custody inside your cloud? And how do you do your chain of custody?
Yeah, so actually most of these files we delete immediately. We just keep the data from the files.
No, delete doesn't mean it's deleted. We all know that.
It's deleted. We make sure it's deleted.
I mean, but give me chain of custody that you did it. Can you do that? Provable.
I'm not sure if we can do that today.
So it needs to be provable. I would love to know if it's provable chain of custody for deletion, because when people say to delete things in the cloud, that actually doesn't get deleted in the cloud.
I know. Yeah. So we actually hold it only in memory.
Okay.
A lot of these files extract metadata, and then the metadata goes to databases. But you're right. We have to prove that.
But I also have to prove that you deleted the metadata.
Yeah. Well, the metadata.
The data about the data is related to the forensic. It's all related.
It's related, but there's information there that is more benign than the information in the original file. And it's clear what the information is. I mean, it's structured data, and you can decide whether you want it or not. I mean, look, I think that, but you're absolutely right. I think that, look, here is a technical statement, okay? We cannot do cybersecurity without data. And we cannot do cybersecurity without a lot of data. However, there are a lot of, there are few very large regulated industries that have challenges with sharing data. Okay, and I think that these industries or the regulators of those industries, at some point, will need to decide whether those industries are going to be protected from a cybersecurity perspective, or whether they're going to keep insisting on their current regulation. I don't think these two can continue forever to coexist.
The laws are changing currently to be even more rigid. That's what's happening today. Like you can't encrypt data, or you have to use lower encryption. You can't store data outside of the country. To me, those are really rigid laws.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really apply to a global...
That's governments getting involved, though.
But that's law.
Well, no, I agree. I'm saying that's sometimes it's governments getting involved.
It depends. If you look at GDPR, GDPR has exceptions for security. For example, and look, yeah, governments and regulation is always behind.
Yes.
But they'll catch up. They'll have no choice.
Or they'll go the complete opposite direction, and that will be their choice.
That's okay. I mean, governments that want their industries to be non-competitive because they're not going to be able to secure themselves, that's also fine. Yeah. You know, that's where we're going to go.
But do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, one more question. Yeah. Sure.
A lot of my customers are federal government customers.
Yes.
And for whatever reason, it seems like security companies who have products in the cloud, they're a little slow to adopt FedRAMP certification. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think they should adopt FedRAMP certification. I think that recently or today even the deal between AWS and the DoD was signed, right? Or it's about to be signed, I think. Yeah, you should run there, right? So yeah, you should. Look, I think that if you look at the 50,000 feet picture, it's going to be easier to make sure that the cloud works for your customer, our customers, whatever, than trying to create an on-premise solution. It's going to take less energy, and the outcome is going to be much better if we find a way, or to find a way, not if, to find a way to enable your customers and anyone else's customers to use the cloud for cybersecurity. So that's what we're doing, right? We spend our energy on finding ways for different customers in different industries in different countries to use the cloud for cybersecurity.
So I get that, and I agree with you. But a lot of the clouds you're basing on, wherever they are, or even if your own, have to still have provable security of their own.
Yeah, I agree.
Then the question is, how do you guys prove out that your sandbox is going to be adequate? How do you prove out that it meets all the requirements and regulations and just general business practices?
So to prove that it works, so there is a list of certifications that you need to get.
Yes.
That most customers would look at, like SAS 70, SOC 2, whatever, right? I don't even know the names of all of them. And yeah, we have most of them, and we're in the process of getting those that we don't have across the world. And there's also doing the right thing. These regulations are also a little bit behind, and yeah, you need to invest a lot of time. I personally think that the best way governments can regulate, or regulators can regulate security is to regulate the outcomes. Meaning, rather than telling us or anyone else how to secure the data, they should regulate the outcome and have very high penalties for achieving the wrong outcome. So, for example, if you would have to pay $100 for every record that you lost, and you're a retailer that just lost 70 million records and you have to pay $7 billion as a penalty, your security will look different and will be much better than if the government tries to regulate how you need to do your security, which just doesn't work. Because everyone that was hacked and credit card numbers were stolen from them were PCI compliant.
I would argue that whilst regulations don't solve everything, it does make a positive impact to the world. I mean, again, EU, GDPR, I think it's absolutely brilliant.
But GDPR regulates outcomes. It doesn't regulate how to do it.
Yes, it does to a point, though. It does state...
you need to use state-of-the-art security.
No, security and privacy by design. So from the conception of the idea, you have to put privacy controls in place.
Yes.
And whilst it's not the full solution, I do think it does make a very positive impact, because it's not only punishing the company, it's also holding the directors personally liable for failure.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to regulate things. You mostly regulate the outcomes of what happens if you're not secure. Okay, rather than trying to tell me how to be secure, tell me what happens if I'm not secure and let me make the decision.
That's fair.
Okay, and because the assumption should be, and especially here in the US, right, that's the philosophy, is that marketplaces work well, or markets work well. And if you regulate the market will work well. So regulate the outcome, not the way the market works.
Fair enough.
And
so things like GDPR, they're definitely governments or politicians trying to do a good thing. Sometimes implementation doesn't always work, and as an IT person, sometimes we feel it the worst.